Hi, I'm Mary Corcoran, and this is our fourth video in the series for the 9 o'clock sharp quilt. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about problem solving, because sometimes things don't come out what they should, and it's really helpful to know why so that you can fix it. I've sewn together a number of 2.5-inch strips, and we're going to look and see if they measure what they should, and if they don't, let's figure out why. There are some real common problems that happen when we're sewing our strips together. So a 2.5-inch strip here and a 2.5-inch strip here, when you add that together and subtract the seam allowance, this should measure 4.5 inches from one side to another. Let's see if I made it. So when I put the ruler on here and I put the edge along this edge, I'm going to come down here. This is the 4.5-inch line. So you can see that I am almost 1/8 of an inch beyond that line. So this is too big, and that's going to cause problems when I put it into my piecing. My whole block is probably going to grow. If I add another strip and it's another 1/8 of an inch off, the problems multiply in piecing, which is why it's important to get that accurate 1/4-inch seam allowance. So when I turn this over, this handy-dandy little tool is called a Purple Thang, and the very end of it measures 1/4 of an inch. This is kind of a rectangle, so it's 1/4 of an inch across this way and not the length. So I'm going to use the end, and when I lay that on the seam allowance, you can see that that seam allowance is not 1/4 inch. It's a little too scant. So if I was aiming for a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, this is too small. So not enough fabric is in the seam allowance and too much is in the piecing, and that's why this was too big. So my Purple Thang is measuring the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can see that the seam allowance is smaller than the width. So that's not a full 1/4 inch. My scant 1/4 inch was too scant. So not enough fabric is in the seam allowance, and too much is showing in the piecing on front. Okay, let's see what's going on with this piece. Just approaching it, I can see there's a little bit of a pucker here, so I'm wondering what's going on. When I lay the ruler on, you can see already that the pink is wavering out from the edge of the ruler, so it doesn't appear to be straight. And when I do kind of pick a line to go on and measure this way, this is the 4.5-inch line, and I can tell that here it's too short, here it's just right, and here it's short again. So let's see what's happened. When you look at the back, you can tell that the seam is closer to the edge here and much farther here. It's oversized and it's undersized. So it wavered. What happened here when I was piecing two long strips together is my attention wandered, so my seam line wandered too, and that's a problem. If I cross-cut this, some of the pieces are going to work for me and some are going to be wrong. So this piecing is going to be problems. Okay, here's our next one. Let's see how I did this time. I'm going to measure this one, and the 4.5-inch line is right here. And you can see that I'm quite short of that. It looks like almost 1/8 of an inch off. And while 1/8 of an inch doesn't sound like a lot, if you add a couple of more strips to that and I'm 1/8 of an inch off each time, I'm going to have serious problems in very short order. So let's find out what went wrong. I'm going to use this white piece of paper and slide it under the seam allowance so we can see more easily when I place the Purple Thang. Now you can tell that when you look at the end of the Purple Thang, if I put one edge right on the seam, there's still a few threads of the pink fabric to the right of the Purple Thang, which means that this seam allowance is too wide. So the seam allowance needs to be a little bit smaller. Sometimes when you use a 1/4 inch foot, even though it might feel like an accurate 1/4 inch, when you sew it like this and measure it, it turns out to be big. So you don't want to rely on your 1/4 inch foot. You want to make sure that you and the machine are making a 1/4 inch that works, so that when you measure it, it's accurate. How did I do this time? Let's see. What we're going to do is measure it. And that, again, you can see the 1/4 inch line there, It's almost there here, and it's not quite there this side. So what happened? Let's bring the pink paper back in to help us look. And this time, I'm almost there. You can see it's more like just one thread off. Last time I was a little bit more off. And here it's just a thread or so. So once we get accurate, you can compare what an accurate 4.5 looks like against this one that's just a little bit short. Okay, how'd I do this time? Here we go, 4.5. That looks like 4.5. You can see the line right there. Looks like it's gone over a little bit there, but let's see what's going on the back. I'd say this one was the closest we've been so far. And here is what it looks like. This Purple Thang 1/4 inch across the back is going from just barely seeing the piecing to the very edge, and you don't see any of the pink fabric on the other side. If we measure down here, that's what it's looking like. So this is the best we've done so far. It's less than a 1/16 of an inch off, and you can see what that looked like with the Purple Thang. This time, let's check this one out. Okay, so we put the ruler on here. Oops, we're short again. You can see here's the 4.5 inch line, and we're at least 1/8 of an inch off. Wow, what a mess. What happened? When we turn it over and we measure the seam allowance, we'll use our white paper again. You know, that looks pretty good. That looks about like it did last time when we were pretty accurate. So maybe it wasn't the sewing. What else could have happened? Well, when we turn it over and look at it, if I pull the fabric, oh my gosh, that's a pressing problem. I don't know if you could tell, but when I pulled that, there's fabric that is pressed into a tuck on the top. What happened here was, instead of pressing from the top of the fabric, I pressed from the back. I put the piecing here and I just pressed the seam allowance over to one side without accounting for it on the top. For accurate pressing that leads to accurate piecing, you want to press from the top and make sure that you're pressing the seam completely open, which I didn't do here. And if I just finger press it and open it up a little bit more, I've already made a real improvement. I'm closer, much closer than I was before. So if I go back and press this with a good steam iron, I'm going to be where I need to be, because the problem in this one wasn't the piecing, it was the pressing.